Chapter 35. Summoned me? Raon narrowed his eyes. To summon him right after the spar. He couldn't understand his intentions. Ah. To be more precise, he told me to bring the top trainee. Rimmer shrugged his shoulders. The top trainee, huh? It meant that it didn't matter who it was, as long as it was the top trainee. It seemed like Glenn thought Martha would win the duel. That's funny. It was funny because it seemed that he had defeated Glenn's predicted top trainees one after another, both Bayan and Martha. Why did he summon me? How should I know? Rimmer pouted, shaking his head. From his expression, he definitely looked like he knew the reason. He just didn't have any intention of telling him. When do I need to go? Raon asked as he caressed the box in his pocket. Right now. Understood. He nodded and dusted off his clothes. Are you going to go like that? Aren't you going to change? That's right. Aren't you afraid of the head of house? Why would I need to be afraid? He isn't calling me to eat me up. Glenn's cold gaze was awkward, but he didn't need to be afraid. I knew you were funny. Rimmer nodded and giggled. He tapped Raon's shoulder with a satisfied expression. Let's go. Yes. Raon headed towards the audience chamber of the Lord's Manor, following Rimmer. Did Lady Martha really lose? To such a small child. It's unbelievable. It's not just about the age, their talent was different. It's luck. There's no other way. Those he met on the way were sneakily glancing at him with either amazed or surprised expressions. It looks like everyone already knows that you've beaten Martha. Rimmer grinned at him. Already? It's because Zigar is an insulated family. He murmured that, because it's closed to the outside, the rumors spread even more quickly inside. Martha was excellent enough to defeat other members of the direct line. It's natural for rumors to spread once you won against such a child head-on. I see. That's why you should be careful. Falling is as fast as rising. Rimmer pointed at himself while saying that. He seemed to be referencing the way he fell after his energy center was broken. Anyway, congratulations. This is a good occasion, so enjoy it. He entered the Lord's Manor while whistling. The warriors seemed to be aware of their visit, since they didn't block their way. The Lord is waiting. When they reached the audience chamber through the long hallway on the first floor, Ren, Glenn's butler, opened the door with a smile. Clunk. The huge metal door split apart with a heart-stopping sound. The energy was magnificent enough to pierce the sky, spreading out from the door. Raon grabbed the left side of his chest. Has it always been this heavy? After acquiring an aura, Glenn's pressure felt even larger. He couldn't stop his hand from trembling in the wake of the endlessly powerful wave of energy. A mere human. Rath's voice was also trembling, squashed by Glenn's pressure. You can feel it properly now that you have an aura, right? Rimmer smiled, a single drop of sweat trickling down his forehead. That is our king. Lifting the corners of his mouth, he entered. Raon swallowed and followed him. Glenn's pressure became more powerful the more he approached him. It felt like his shoulder was being squashed by the mighty wave of energy. Greetings to the Lord. Raon, who was standing next to Rimmer, knelt. Glenn's wave of energy reached for the sky. Stand up. Raon's was automatically lifted by the voice that gave him the order. Upon meeting Glenn's red eyes, everything around him grew blurry. It really was an overwhelming presence. I brought the top trainee, as my lord commanded. Without even responding to Rimmer, Glenn stared at Raon. Maybe he didn't like it or feel comfortable about it. Raon couldn't read his thoughts at all. Did you acquire the 10,000 Flames cultivation? Yes. How long did it take? It took about 7 months. It's slow. He tilted his chin slightly. It looked like he was looking down on him. Show me the aura. Upon hearing Glenn's order, Raon looked at Rimmer. When he asked with his eyes whether it was okay to use his aura in front of the head of house, Rimmer nodded. Normally you can't, but he is asking you to. Understood. Raon stood, clenching his fist before relaxing it. Rage. With the sound of an almost extinguished small flame being ignited once again, the red flame appeared. The first flame of the 10,000 flames cultivation. The one in the first flame was ignited. Is that the first one of the 10,000 flames cultivation? Glenn's pupils, which looked like they were sunk deep under the mud, trembled lightly. What did you pursue upon igniting that aura? It is a flame that won't be extinguished, nor be vanquished. Not extinguished? I imagined a flame that won't be extinguished by wind, nor by rain. Glenn kept staring at the flame burning on Raon's hand for a long time without saying anything. Raon thought he might have looked like he was touched, although that could have been just his impression. It's pretty good. Pardon? He received a compliment, one that he'd never expected to get. He tried touching his ears, thinking he might have misheard it. A swordsman or magician of fire attribute has the best power output, but their endurance and defense are weaker in return. An inextinguishable flame might allow you to overcome that weakness. Consider how to use it thoroughly. Understood. Raon nodded with surprised eyes. He'd never even dreamed that Glenn would give him such advice, so his voice trembled slightly. It shouldn't seem so strange. I'm merely telling you what I couldn't tell you during the judgment ceremony. Ah. He understood. Glenn had given advice to everyone but Raon during the judgment ceremony. It seemed that he was giving him the advice that he couldn't give him back then. That's one mysterious personality. Glenn was as cold as a man sculpted from a glacier, but he did take care of people sometimes. He was the complete opposite of Darius, who pretended to take care of his people but actually used them as objects. I'll now tell you the reason that I called for you. Resting his chin on his hand, Glenn gazed down at Raon. I'll be giving you all a mission around next year. A mission? You all have been training for well over a year, including the temporary training period. Since you've all acquired the aura needed to become beginner swordsmen, it is all right to go outside. Do you think you are too young? Age doesn't matter when it comes to battles. Swordsmen must always fight for as long as they can hold a sword, regardless of their age. That's not it. I thought it was too late. In his previous life, he had received assassination missions at the age of 8, not 14. His current age wasn't too young, but too old. It's not just you. Tell all the trainees to prepare thoroughly, so that they can play their role regardless of the situation and time. Understood. You should head out now. Glenn closed his eyes and waved his hand. Raon knelt once again and bowed to him, then left the audience chamber. It was about time you got a mission. Rimmer grinned and grabbed the back of his hand, fingers knitted together. What kind of mission is going to be assigned to us? It hasn't been decided yet. Monster subjugation, protecting the leading figure, bandit extermination. Since you don't know what kind of mission you will get, you'd better prepare to be able to handle all kinds of situations, just as the head of house said. Isn't the instructor coming with us? I will, but my mission is different from yours, as the instructor's mission is to protect you. I see. Huh? Rimmer's eyes widened. It looked like he expected him to be surprised. Of course I'll have to carry out the mission by myself. He'd received nothing like help in his previous life, even when he got a mission at the age of 8. An instructor that would protect him in case of emergency was a huge luxury. Zigar is softer than I thought. Leaving a surprised Rimmer behind, he left the Lord's manor with a smile. After Raon left to the annex building, Rimmer returned to the audience chamber. My lord looks very happy. Rimmer smiled and looked at Glenn, who was standing on the platform. I'm the same as always. Ha! But the corners of your lips are 2 millimeters higher than usual. Stop your pleasantries and give me a report on Martha's condition. She is bruised quite badly, but she will heal with some rest. The problem is the mental shock she received. If she can't overcome such a thing, she has no reason to carry the name Zigar. Glenn applied the Zigar's mindset without exception for Martha, who had been adopted at 8 years old. Did you help Raon draw an image for his fire? I am a teacher, after all. But Raon was the one who chose it. I only taught him that there are multiple possibilities. Rimmer shrugged his shoulders and continued. What is your impression after seeing the long-awaited first head of House's aura? It was exactly the same as it was written. It was as beautiful as a flower made of fire, and it also wielded an incomparable power compared to its size. Yes. It completely destroyed Martha's Titan aura, which she's been cultivating for over 4 years. It was such an unreasonable power. By the way, isn't the color supposed to be golden? The color will change slightly depending on the fire's power. Keep instructing him on the correct path in the future as well. I knew the head of house had a soft spot for him. Glenn didn't answer, waving his hand with his eyes closed. He was telling him to get out, since he was being annoying. Then, please take care of choosing a mission for the children. That's not my job. It's the general administration's. Stop worrying about that. Just keep raising the children to survive in any kind of mission. Yes. I'll make sure to instruct them so they won't become lazy. I can only say that you should look at yourself, first. Glenn snickered upon seeing Rimmer's confident expression. We call that a two-faced teacher. Rimmer grinned in return. Judiel, who was taking care of the garden, turned around upon hearing a stepping sound from behind her. Huff. Yo, young Master Raon. Raon was gazing at her. The moment she met his gaze, she felt her heart sink. You have returned. She stood up and checked on his condition. His clothes were dusty, but he didn't seem to be hurt anywhere. No way. Did he win against her? Against Martha? She'd already known that Raon would spar with Martha Zigar after word had spread a month before. However, she'd never thought that he would win, let alone return completely uninjured. Did you win the spar? What do you think? Raon smiled. Ah. Looking at his victorious smile reminded her of that day. The red eyes floating on the lake. Calling it an incarnation of fear wasn't an exaggeration. Of course. There's no way this monster would lose to a mere genius. She realized, once again, just what kind of existence Raon Zigar was. The Central Martial Palace will contact you again soon to order you to investigate me more thoroughly. They would. Write whatever you think you should write and bring it to me. Understood. With a smile that gave her goosebumps, he entered the annex building. Judiel dropped the weeds from her hands, her back drenched in a cold sweat. A monster that defeated a genius. Raon. As soon as Raon entered the annex building, he met Sylvia as she was putting on her clothes. Where are you going? Where would I go? You were supposed to return today, but you hadn't arrived. I was about to head out to look for you. Sylvia ran towards him. She looked faster than an average swordsman. Are you okay? Does it hurt anywhere? Her eyes kept moving left and right, like falling leaves. I'm not hurt. Phew. Sylvia sighed in relief, smoothing a hand down her chest. However, her eyes didn't stop peering at Raon's body. Was the spar cancelled? No, I won. And you're still not hurt? Because I didn't get hit. You won without getting hit once? MHM. Really? Helen dropped Sylvia's outer garments. Since it was common knowledge that Martha's talent was on par with the direct line, their surprised reactions were understandable. Well, if you aren't hurt, let's eat first. Helen, prepare the meal immediately. I'm okay. Ha? But you haven't eaten dinner yet. I have something to do today. Raon shook his head while touching the wooden box in his pocket, which contained an elixir. It was time for him to become stronger once more. Chapter 36. As soon as Raon entered his room, he closed the curtains and locked the door. He'd told them to not enter, but he was preparing just in case. Wrath. He tapped the ice flower bracelet on his wrist to call out wrath. How dare a mere insect human call the King of Essence by name? You shouldn't have told me your name then. It's because the King of Essence didn't know you would resist the possession. Wrath murmured that he informs the humans of his great name as a last consideration before eating up their mind and body. I don't know about great, but are you planning to interfere again? As a monarch of Devildom, the King of Essence keeps his words. The King of Essence will never interrupt you again while you are cultivating. I suppose, since you must have used all the power that you've stored up so far. Raon nodded. Wrath had attacked him with everything he had when he was acquiring the 10,000 Flames cultivation a month ago. He shouldn't have been able to recover his strength yet. You idiot! The energy of Wrath can be used at any time. It's just to keep the word of a monarch. Ah, whatever. Seriously, you little shit. When Raon interrupted him, Wrath started to emit coldness while trembling in anger. Too bad. It was a chance to raise my stats again. Coo. Wrath ground his teeth. The frost started falling between his icy flames, as though he was about to explode in anger. Raon scowled, watching the trembling Wrath. I can't be careless against him. Wrath was an enemy, not an ally. He couldn't be careless in front of him, whether he was cultivating or training. He had to keep on his toes at all times. Well, then. He took out the wooden box containing the 9 flowers medicine and opened the lid. It radiated with the strong fragrance of dry bushes found in the fall mountains. It smelled nice. From the way the medicine spread its fragrance throughout the room, he could already tell that it was a very effective one. Ha! Raon exhaled slowly and put the 9 flowers medicine in his mouth. The bitter, yet strong, taste of the medicine covered his whole mouth. He told me to chew it down. Following Rimmer's advice, he swallowed it after chewing it, and it was released in his throat. Whir! The thick energy within the 9 flowers medicine spread out throughout his mana circuits like smoke rising from a chimney. Raon sat down and closed his eyes, starting to rotate his ring of fire and cultivating the 10,000 flames cultivation. The energy from the 9 flowers medicine circulated throughout his body and expanded his muscles. The energy center was stimulated then expanded, and his mana perception increased to the extreme. Whap! The hot energy, similar to the one heated in the charcoal kiln, dashed through his mana circuits. Whap! The pure ice melting in his mana circuits followed the path cleared by the 10,000 flames cultivation to circulate throughout his entire body. Cultivating the ring of fire first was the correct choice. The ring of fire cleared up the coldness and impurities inside his mana circuits, and the energy of the 10,000 flames cultivation dashed along that path like a ray of light, which allowed the elixir to be used more efficiently. The two cultivation techniques synergized as one, maximizing their merits, and canceling out their demerits. Whir! All the mana from 9 flowers medicine was melted down, and the ring of fire, his body, and his energy center were connected by a red path. Raon got even more absorbed into the world of cultivation, feeling the endless flow of mana. When the sun that rose was setting down on the western mountain once again, and the evening glow was shining upon him, Raon finally opened his eyes. The 4th ring of fire has been created. Ring of fire has reached 4 stars. Ring of fire, 4 stars, has increased the expertise of the body and soul. Strength, agility, and stamina have increased with the effect of the ring of fire, 4 stars, Energy, willpower, and perception increase with the effect of the ring of fire, 4 stars, Raon clenched his fist. He could feel the 4th ring rotating violently, even without the messages. Constitution decline in athletic abilities has disappeared. Constitution decline in mana affinity has disappeared. Water resistance has reached 4 stars. Perception of the snowflower has reached 2 stars. The ring of fire wasn't the only skill that was raised to 4 stars. And also increased in rank. Amazing. It was a tremendous change, especially considering he'd only taken an intermediate elixir. But of course, it wasn't only because of the elixir. The efforts he'd been making for almost a year had been accumulating and were finally exploding because of the elixir. Raon rolled his shoulders and stood up. His energy center was full of hot and cold energy, and his body was as light as a leaf riding the wind. His body's condition was perfect, as if he just woke up from a good sleep. He felt like he could now single-handedly win against Martha with her aura, using his physical abilities alone. Whap! When he was about to open the status window, Wrath, who was inside the bracelet, burst up with a blue flame. 4 stars? 4 stars in water resistancy? Rath's voice was trembling furiously. It appeared that he hadn't managed to see the information about the Ring of Fire, only managing to see the water resistance that appeared at the end. Now that I think about it, he doesn't know. Rath could see the message but couldn't see the status window. It looked like he was surprised because he realized Raon had water resistance. You sly bastard. Have you been deceiving the King of Essence with your 4-star water resistance? You never asked me, though. Ugh. Rath gave him a deadly glare. I expected you to have a resistance, but it's a 4 stars type that can grow. You disgusting bastard. How come I'm disgusting just because I have water resistance? Raon smiled bitterly. Seeing the ruckus he's causing over the water resistance alone, he'll likely start rampaging once he learns about the Ring of Fire. Raon thought he might be able to see Rath faint once he learned about the Ring of Fire, which increased the expertise of his body and soul, or about his reincarnation. That's why I told you that you can't win against me. Shut your mouth. If the King of Essence uses his original power, a mere human like you will easily be turned into a block of ice. But you can't. You never fail to anger me whenever you open your mouth. Unable to withstand it anymore, Rath dashed at him with an exploding flame of coldness. Whap! The coldness that could turn his lips blue in an instant stormed around his entire body. The coldness and emotional stimulation had become stronger. It looked like Rath had also grown. However, the Ring of Fire and water resistance had leveled up even more than that. In front of the 4 naturally spinning rings, Rath's anger was child's play to deal with. Bang! As he was enduring the blue coldness stabbing at him throughout his body, the messages appeared. You have withstood Rath's attack. Stamina has increased. Damn it! Rath let out a horrible shriek, similar to a monster's, and came out from Raon's body. It feels like all my limbs are gone. There is no way. No way. He started screaming. It looked like he gave up on pretending to be composed. Well, that's why I told you that you can't do it. The King of Essence's abilities aren't just coldness. Inciting the primitive emotion of wrath is his real ability. Back in Devildom, the number of devils who self-destructed from the King of Essence's incitation of wrath was over 10,000. But that doesn't work against me, either. Arf! Rath's blue flame started to become red. He was about to explode, but he didn't start attacking again, since he seemed to dislike giving away free stats. It's better now that it's silent. Raon nodded like nothing happened and opened his status window. Status window. Name, Raon Zigar. Title, First Victory. State, Curse of Frost, 6 strands. Trait, Wrath, Ring of Fire, 4 stars, Water Resistance, 4 stars, Perception of the Snowflower, 2 star, 10,000 Flame Cultivation, 2 stars, Coldness of the Frost, 2 stars, Fire Resistance, 2 stars. Strength, 40. Agility, 41. Stamina, 41. Energy, 29. Perception, 53. He immediately noticed that decline in athletic abilities and decline in mana affinity, which used to be anchored in the status window, were now gone. An irresistible smile appeared on his face. His body was so light he could fly, and he could feel the mana entering his body throughout his pores. It seemed there was a good reason for all that. My stats have also increased a lot. Each one of the stats had increased by at least 2 levels. His current physical abilities and perception weren't any worse than a proper swordsman. The water resistance is a great harvest. Since his water resistance was now 4 stars, he could now easily endure magic on par with 4 circles. The resistance was going to be more helpful with fighting mages or shamans, rather than swordsmen. I have gained a lot. The 9 flowers medicine was a good elixir, but he'd obtained a lot more than that. It was to the point that he couldn't stop himself from smiling, despite his cynical personality. Shall I try it out just a little bit? Since he wanted to test out how much his body and aura had changed, he opened the door. Huff! Ah! Sylvia and Helen, who were standing in front of the door, hurriedly stepped back in surprise. What are you doing? And no. Since you said you were cultivating, I was guarding. Same goes for me. They both had slightly bloodshot eyes. It looked like they had been guarding him the entire night, without even making a sound while breathing. As he widened his perception, he could see that there were other maids outside his window. Raon closed his eyes. A warmth even greater than when he cultivated the 10,000 flames cultivation warmed his heart. It even gave him the impression that the ice from his mana circuit had disappeared for a moment. Thank you. He lowered his head to them, and the other maids outside, feeling grateful and apologetic at the same time. Sob. Madam. Helen. What shall I do? Sylvia collapsed to the side while bursting out in tears. My son has grown up so well. That's right. I wouldn't have any regrets even if I died right now. Madam. Helen. The two of them sobbed while hugging each other. This is the hardest part. Rather than Wrath's emotional attack, the ice inside his mana circuit, or the pressure from Glenn Zigar, he found it the most difficult to deal with Sylvia and Helen. Raon quickly left the annex building while they were busy hugging each other. Over the next 2 days, Raon finished getting used to his changed body. His body and perception had changed more than what he'd seen in the status window. When he first practiced his swordsmanship, he thought it wasn't his body. Despite using the same technique, the power and speed were on a different level. And the reason it had changed so much was simple. His state had changed. The decline in athletic abilities and the decline in mana affinity disappearing from his state allowed his body to be at peak condition. His body moved exactly the way he wanted, and his mana, which used to appear as thin as sand, now felt as big as a bead. This is another foundation. Rather than his increased might, he felt more satisfied about hardening the foundation that would allow him to reach a higher level in martial arts. That was why he was taking care of flowers in the flower bed in the garden, taking a rest on his last day of holidays. You idiot. When you are thinning out the soil, you must dig out the bottom first. You must use your hand instead of a trowel to properly mix the nutritious soil. Wrath was unbecomingly knowledgeable about the flowers and trees. Thanks to him, he could manage the flower bed without having to look in a book. Back in Devilldom, the King of Essence once filled an entire flower bed with ice flowers. The devils that saw the flower bed lowered their heads to the flowers in respect. That was an expression of admiration and awe for the King of Essence. It would have been better if he could stop babbling. Wrath really talked way too much. Especially when he started with the back in Devilldom, the King of Essence, he could talk for at least 10 minutes before stopping. After hearing about the Devilldom every day, he'd started growing familiarity to the Devilldom that he'd never been before. That's not it. You must treat the flowers delicately. If you can't, then freeze it first. I know. Raon frowned and flicked his finger. When he carefully planted the flower, as if he were controlling mana, Wrath stopped preaching. It was when he was about to head to the left flower bed, after finishing the right side. A thin shape was walking towards him from the entrance of the annex building. The long hair had been cut short, but it was impossible to not recognize her. Martha Zigar. Martha, who'd lost 2 days ago, was approaching him while frowning heavily. Are you here to pick a fight? Raon dusted off his dirty hands and stood up. That would be welcomed. Chapter 37. Under the purple glow of the evening sky, Martha stood with her mouth firmly closed. After standing as still as a stone statue until complete darkness surrounded them, she finally raised her head slowly. I shouldn't have lost. Martha clenched her fist. Her grip was so tight that her blood vessels were clearly visible. I shouldn't have lost to anyone until I found my mother. Despite resolving to never lose until she achieved her goal, she ended up losing. And it was an extremely disgraceful defeat on top of that. She'd twisted her own personality, became foul-mouthed, and kept her distance from other people. But it was all pointless now that she lost with such an overwhelming difference. Damn it! Her foster father, Denier Zigar, adopted her into the house Zigar because he'd recognized her talent. And yet, she lost to Raon Zigar, a collateral that was 1 year younger than her. She couldn't predict the kind of measures her father would take as a result. Denier was a kind person, but that might have been an act. She needed to take into consideration the possibility of getting chased out. No, I can never let that happen. If she got chased out, she'd lose her last hope of finding her mother. She had to beg for that to not happen, even if she had to cling to his leg. Ha! My lady. Martha was extremely nervous, to the extent that she didn't even turn back when her butler Camel called out to her. It's a letter from Sir Denier. Martha finally turned around upon hearing that Denier Zigar had sent her a letter. Her black pupils swayed like a wave. Here it is. Martha swallowed and opened the letter. Martha, congratulations on your first defeat. Don't worry too much, as one defeat will not gain you the label of a loser. However, reflect countless times on why you lost, and how you lost. That self-examination will become the basis for your future growth. I wanted to visit you personally and comfort you, but my mission is taking longer than I thought. I'm sorry I can't be with you. It wasn't blame or mockery. It was a letter sent from a father who was worried about his daughter from the bottom of his heart. I'm still investigating your birth mother. Since I still haven't given up on it, you shall not give up either. Martha folded the letter with trembling hands and put it in her pocket. She tried pressing the pocket, as if she were checking her wallet. Ha! Ha! The letter was putting the broken pieces of her mind back together. The last part especially made her depression and anxiety, which used to press down on her shoulders, fly away. Tell father that I'll bear it in mind. And that I'm really, really grateful. Understood. Camel nodded, smiling lightly. By the way, my lady. If you are worried about the obedience that was wagered during the spar with young Master Raon, it can be solved by pressuring the annex building. It can be silently taken care of, using the direct line's authority. No, don't do it. Martha shook her head definitely. Her pupils, resembling black pearls, shone with a clear light that was missing before. The fact remains that I lost, and in the most miserable way, at that. She knew better than anyone the reason that she lost to Raon. The defeat wasn't because of my carelessness. I simply lost, that's all. Raon sliced through her sword using that red aura. Since a swordsman had lost her sword, the victor was already decided at that point. And yet, he threw away his own sword and fought her a second time, using his fists. If she acted shamefully towards someone who'd fought her like that, her father would be more disappointed in her. A Zigar should keep their promise, even if it is a stupid one. I'm sure father would say the same thing. Certainly. Sir Denier would have said the same. As a daughter, I can't bring shame upon him. Indeed. Camel visibly lifted the corners of his mouth and laughed, as if he were praising her. Camel, do you have a knife? Yes, I do. But why? Give it to me. Here it is. Martha stared at the thin dagger Camel handed over for a while, then unsheathed it. Whack! Nodding with determination, she cut her ebony hair from the middle without hesitating. My lady! It's fine. I'm parting with my idiotic and ugly self from before. Martha smiled, letting the cut hair fly away with the wind. Her smile was shining like a snowflake. Ha! Camel gasped, since he hadn't expected that to happen. Please cancel the direct line training tomorrow morning. Pardon? It's not difficult to cancel it, but what are you planning to do? I have somewhere to go. Martha declared, entering the mansion. Watching her back as she entered the mansion, Camel nodded kindly. After finishing the daybreak training on the last day of the holidays, she immediately left her mansion. Evading Camel and the maids, who were asking where she was going without even taking her breakfast, she went towards the annex building in the west alone. It was pretty far away, but since the road was nicely paved, she could find it without any difficulty. As she kept walking to the west, she could see a small house surrounded by a small garden. Does he live there? Martha furrowed her brows, as it was small and shabby compared to the structures in the main building. However, since the house she used to live in before she was adopted was way smaller than the annex building, it didn't incite any other emotion from her. She didn't care and kept walking towards the garden. Somebody is there. A blonde body was squatting down at the flower bed, digging the ground and planting flowers. Huh? Martha's eyes widened. Raon Zigar? She'd thought he was a servant, but he wasn't. The one who was planting flowers was Raon Zigar, who made her taste defeat for the first time. Raon dusted off his hands and stood up. It looked like he noticed her as well. What's the matter? Martha didn't respond, standing in front of the flower bed that Raon was taking care of. The flowers looked fresh and healthy, probably because he just watered them. He has this kind of hobby? She thought he was too precocious, so she was surprised at finding a childish side to him. What should I do? The reason that Martha visited Raon was simple. She wanted a rematch. She kept thinking about her defeat after reading her father's advice, but she couldn't remember how she lost. Since she couldn't remember, she had no idea how large the difference in abilities was between them, and whether there was any way of making up for it or not. In short, she couldn't reflect. Therefore, she needed a rematch. She wanted to determine the difference between her and Raon by fighting him with a clear mind. Ha! Martha sighed heavily and lifted her head. She carefully opened her mouth while looking into Raon's eyes, which were as calm as a lake. I want to try fighting you again. Not admitting defeat is a bit disturbing. No, I'm not refusing to admit to having lost so easily. I just can't tell how I lost, and I came looking for you in order to figure that out. Raon's eyes shone for a second. He seemed to think it was unexpected. Then, what's the offer? What? For a loser to challenge the victor once again, you'd have to give something away, wouldn't you? Hell no. You don't need a prize in order to fight. I do. Ugh. Martha groaned lightly. This is why. Because he never wanted to come out at a loss, she'd felt like Raon wasn't actually a child. You don't have one? It's troublesome if you don't. Raon crossed his arms, showing that he had no intention of fighting. What shall I do? Martha thought as she looked at Raon, biting her lip. Then she looked at the flowers below. Shall I try stepping on it a little? Since he was taking care of the flower bed at that hour, he must have loved the flowers. If she provoked him by harming them a little, he would probably attack her. You must like the flowers, although that doesn't suit you. Martha secretly moved her foot towards the flower bed. Not really. Despite her expectations, Raon shook his head while tapping his trowel. What? I said I don't like flowers, and I don't understand why people like them either. I was only taking care of them because of my mother. Martha, who was about to step on the flowers, suddenly stopped. Why? Aren't you going to step on them? Raon tilted his head while smiling slightly. It seemed he was already aware of her intentions. Damn it! Martha cursed and pulled back her feet. Hearing that he'd been taking care of the flowers for his mother, who loved the flowers, she didn't feel like stepping on them anymore. Shit! She clicked her tongue. As she was about to turn around, the annex building's door opened and a beautiful woman with her long hair tied back ran out towards them. Raon! Raon's eyes, which were as cold as ice, were suddenly flustered. Oh mother! I was wondering why I couldn't find you, but you were taking care of the flower bed for me. But who is this, a friend of yours? Her eyes were filled with curiosity. Is she Sylvia Zigar? The woman who left the household in order to be with her beloved, then returned in order to save her child. She was the family's disgrace and was said to belong in the trash. Maybe it was because she'd had a similar experience, but she didn't look like trash to Martha, but a courageous mother who lived for the sake of her beloved child. She's not a friend, she is nothing. I'll handle it here, so please go back. It was a rare sight to see Raon stuttering. She is also pretty. Black hair and black pupils? Ah. You're Martha. Sylvia smiled brightly while clapping her hands. Martha silently nodded. I heard you sparred with Raon, were you hurt anywhere? Since they were similar to the mother that she missed so much, she could tell that Sylvia's rose-colored eyes held real worry about her well-being. I'm fine. Thank God, I was worried. Sylvia smiled lightly. I heard Big Brother Denier had brought in a very talented child, but there was more to it. She thoroughly examined her, and told her that she was really pretty, too pretty. But what brought you here? I had something to tell him. I'll return since I'm done now. Martha bowed her head and was about to leave. Growl. The result of skipping breakfast after her daybreak training occurred. Ah. Martha's face turned completely red. When she was about to run away, something warm caught her hand. It was Sylvia. She flicked her finger while smiling. Let's eat before you go. She didn't know why, but Martha couldn't shake off that thin hand of hers. What was this? Raon furrowed his brows, looking at Martha, who was sitting across from him at the dining table. I don't even know anymore. He could understand Sylvia inviting Martha to eat before she left after hearing Martha's stomach growling, since Sylvia is a very kind person. However, for that crazy girl to be led to the table and modestly wait for the food to be brought out was something unimaginable for him. Maybe when she cut her hair, she also cut out her bad temper. Raon loves meat stews. That's why we always have at least one stew on the menu. Ah, I see. Sylvia kept smiling. Raon wondered what she was so happy about, and Martha kept responding with a lowered head, as if she was embarrassed. What is that girl doing? Wasn't her personality different? I don't know what's going on either. This was the first time since he'd been born into House Zigar that he'd encountered such an unexpected situation. The food was brought out soon enough. They were stews, roast beef, vegetables, and baked bread. You are 1 year older than Raon, right? Yes. Are you having any difficulty with training? Not really. Sylvia kept talking to Martha while dining, and Martha also kept answering immediately, despite eating. Huh? Raon tilted his head. Seriously, what's up with her? The first thing Martha would do when someone talked to her was swear. He'd never imagined seeing her acting so favorably. Raon gulped down the stew, unable to tell if he was consuming it through his mouth or his nose. We are very good at cooking, but the quality of the meat is a bit worse than the main building. Make sure to chew it well to digest it better. Martha's hand, which was holding the fork, trembled upon hearing Sylvia's advice. Since she could start rampaging soon, Raon readied himself to stop her. However, she lowered her head once again and started eating. Raon wasn't knowledgeable about human emotions, but he felt like Martha's hands were expressing some kind of sorrow and yearning. Thank you for the meal. The awkward meal finally ended, and Martha stood up. How was the taste? It was tasty. I'm glad. Please be friends with Raon from now on. Sylvia stood in front of the door, waving her hand at Martha. Yes. Martha unexpectedly gave a normal answer and left the annex building. Seriously, what was that? She clearly came to pick a fight with him, so he couldn't understand why she'd suddenly started acting like that. Did she eat something off? Probably. Human emotion was really difficult to understand. As soon as she left the annex building, Martha bit her lip. She felt like she was going to cry otherwise. She looked similar. Her face, the color of her hair, the clothes she was wearing, and even her voice was different. However, those rose-colored eyes were too similar to her missing mother. That was why she couldn't shake her off when she caught her hand. Raon must have thought she was crazy. It was the first time she saw his eyes shivering so much. She'd considered leaving, but she was glad she stayed to finish her meal. Sylvia's gentle gaze and voice, and when she heard her telling to chew it well, which was the nagging that her mother used to give all the time, Martha really felt like she was with her mother. That was why she wanted to find her mother even more now. White blood religion, those sons of bitches. The ones that took away her mother were the white blood religion, one of the 5 demons. She was going to find her mother at all costs, even if she had to kill all those fanatics. Resolving herself over and over, Martha returned to the main building. My lady, where have you been? Huh? No way, were you crying? Camel, who was sweeping in front of the door, widened his eyes. What are you talking about? I would never do that. Martha wiped away her tears and shook her head. She quickly opened the door and was entered the mansion, but then she stuck her head out. Camel, can you get some high-quality beef for me? Beef? Of course I can. But what are you going to use it for? I need it for something, so leave it in front of my room once you get it. Martha responded, then immediately closed the door and ran up to her room. Ha ha. Camel gently smiled while watching her. I wonder if she realizes she looks a lot better now than before. The next day, Raon was headed towards the training ground as soon as he finished his daybreak cultivation. Like always, he was the first one to arrive. His head was filled with various thoughts because of Martha visiting him the day before, but he decided to think of it as a silly dream. After a light warm-up, he started to train the combination sword. As the sun rose, the children started to enter the training ground one after another. While he was swinging his sword and listening to the trainees' idle chatters, everyone suddenly fell silent. When he turned his head around, Martha was walking in through the training ground's wide-open doors. The trainees were staring at her with their jaws dropped, probably because of her short hair. Raon Zigar. Martha stopped in front of Raon. I can't retrieve the words I have already spoken. I'm not going to try making up for everything I've done so far with some kind of sloppy apology. Her eyes were even calmer than the day before. They looked like a motionless lake. But I'll keep my promise. Promise? The promise that we made before the spar, that the loser would obey the winner. She turned around after saying that. Her eyes were saying that she'd completely admitted her defeat. It's bigger than I thought. For her to change in such a short period of time, she wasn't the average narrow-hearted person. Although, he still couldn't understand why she stayed for the meal the day before. Why the hell are you blocking my way? Fuck off. While Raon was tilting his head, Martha kicked away Dorian, who was awkwardly standing in front of her. Ah. So sorry. Tisk. She clicked her tongue and returned to her usual seat. Raon smirked. It looked like her attitude towards him was the only thing that had changed. I knew that everyone here wasn't normal. Chapter 38. The new year had started. Raon's life at 14 years old could be summarized in one word. Training. He continued the life of a training demon that arrived at the training ground before anyone else and left it later than anyone. Runan's eyes were still blank, but the sharpness of her sword and the coldness of her water attribute aura became incomparably better. Bayan, who grew up a lot mentally, had now captivated the trainees' hearts. He kept swinging his sword day and night in preparation for the day that he would reclaim the title of top trainee. As for Martha, she kept swinging her sword and cultivating her aura without rest in order to wipe away the stain of her first defeat. One problem was that her personality, which was already bad enough, became even more violent. Nobody even wanted to approach her anymore. However, she acted differently towards one person, Raon Zigar. Despite not even listening to the instructors properly, Martha obeyed whatever Raon told her without complaint. She even looked like a faithful servant to bystanders. The trainees knew that it was the result of the bet, so they thought her attitude wasn't going to last for more than several days. They were wrong. Even in the new year, Martha kept honestly obeying Raon's words. Everyone was surprised. They'd never imagined the foul-mouthed and ill-tempered Martha was going to keep her promise to Raon. As such, Raon made the last disruptor submit and was acknowledged by every trainee in the 5th training ground. Gather. At Raon's call, all the trainees that were warming up everywhere in the training ground looked at him at once. Tisk. MHM. Bayan clicked his tongue lightly and came to stand in front of Raon. Runan trotted towards him like a puppy that saw its owner. Martha's eyes were full of bloodlust, but she stood next to them without saying anything. Since Runan, Bayan, and Martha, who were the most influential people on the training ground, listened to Raon's instruction, the other trainees naturally followed them. Why did you ask us to gather? Bayan raised his head and looked at the empty platform. We are supposed to do personal training this morning. No, it's regular training today. I hadn't heard that. The head instructor said he forgot to tell us. Raon sighed. Rimmer had visited him the evening before to ask him to gather the trainees in the morning. That man is just so. Bayan grinded his teeth. He still seemed to dislike Rimmer. Anyway, wait here for now since it's regular training today. Just warm up for now. PFF. Why is he so forgetful? Is he getting senile? He was probably messing around and ended up drunk. I heard he went to a bar yesterday. It happens all the time, let's just get ourselves ready. The trainees complained a bit, but they started warming up at the center of the training ground, following Raon's instructions. About 5 minutes later, the door to the training ground creaked open and the instructors entered. Yawn. Rimmer, who was at the very back, yawned so hard that he couldn't even hide his mouth with his hand and walked up on the platform. You are late, instructor. Bayan raised his hand and shouted. It's supposed to be personal training today, but since the instructors arrived late because we were preparing for you all, we aren't exactly late. That has nothing to do with TH. Well, since we are late, let's start training right away. Rimmer ignored Bayan and waved his hand. Raon could hear Bayan grinding his teeth from behind. Their relationship didn't seem to change. The reason we took away your personal training time today is in order to hand you the most important thing for a swordsman. TH, the most important thing for a swordsman? What is that? A new swordsmanship? A secret technique? A cultivation technique? The trainee's eyes glittered, full of expectations. Humph. After enjoying their gazes for a while, Rimmer opened his mouth once their excited voices subsided. It's footwork. Eek? Footwork? Why is that the most important thing for a swordsman? Ha, I knew it. Hearing that it was about footwork, the trainees stamped their feet in disappointment. I knew it was footwork. Raon nodded calmly. Footwork was the way of walking. It was a systematic method developed in order to make the swordsmanship or fist technique more offensive, defensive, or simply faster. I was thinking it was about time. Since he got used to both swordsmanship and fist techniques, and the aura had already developed to a certain extent, he thought it was the right moment to start learning footwork. Many people learn intermediate-level swordsmanship before coming here, but it's very rare for them to have learned proper footwork. That's true. The trainees slowly nodded, unable to refute it. Bayan, Runan, and Martha remained silent. Since your goal is to become swordsman, swordsmanship is indeed important. However, Rimmer grinned and jumped down from the platform. His body disappeared like a blown-out candlelight. What makes the swordsmanship sharper and faster, and what will save your life in the future? It's footwork, also known as the movement of your feet. His voice was heard from behind. When Raon turned around, Rimmer, who had disappeared in front of him, was standing behind him with his hands folded behind his back. Huff. When? What was that? The trainees' jaws dropped. The way Rimmer had appeared behind them without making any sound filled them with amazement. You must have realized during the spar that training on your own and having an opponent to fight against are quite different. That's true. I couldn't move my body the way I wanted. The sword wasn't following the correct trajectory either. The trainees nodded, since they'd all realized during the spar that a real fight was different from training. If you want to do your best in a real battle, you have to train your footwork more than your swordsmanship. In my opinion, the most important thing during a one-on-one spar isn't swordsmanship or aura, but footwork. Even the head of house agreed with me on that. The head of house? Wow. If my lord said that. The trainees opened their mouths wide. Since Glenn, who was the most respected person to them, said that the footwork was important, they were immediately convinced, unlike when Rimmer said it. Footwork. Bayan straightened his spine. Yes, if I could use footwork back then. His strengths were sharpness, precision, and speed. When he fought against Raon back then, if he could use proper footwork then he wouldn't have lost so easily. I see. Bayan turned his head, hearing a growling voice. Martha's eyes were shining while clenching her fist. She seemed to be thinking the same thing. We are the same. He'd thought Martha had become silent, but that wasn't the case. Instead of showing it on the outside, Martha has been burning with passion to defeat Raon on the inside. We will start with the river footwork, which incorporates the flow of a river. When Rimmer bounced his legs lightly, as if he were walking on a gravelly field next to a river, his body suddenly leaped to the platform. After getting into the posture to demonstrate the footwork, he murmured that it was bothersome and laid down. Skilled assistant, come forth. When Rimmer clapped his hands, the instructor who was standing behind him came up and started to demonstrate the river footwork's postures. Crack! Bayan clenched his fist. He resolved himself that, by mastering the footwork, he would one day teach that lazy instructor a lesson. He would thoroughly remember the river footwork's postures. The river footwork only had 12 forms, and the postures were simple enough that the demonstration didn't take too long. This is literally the basics. Since Raon was rotating the ring of fire, he could grasp the form, posture, and flow of river footwork at a glance. Although it was his first time seeing it, it was faithful to the basics, and the flexible flow could be applied in any other technique. The instructors will move around and correct your postures, so try repeating the footwork the way you've seen and felt it. Yes. The trainees spread out throughout the training ground and started to perform the river footwork. However, Raon didn't move. Rotating his ring of fire with his eyes closed, he replayed the river footwork the instructor had shown in his head. 6 in defense and 4 in attack. As expected of basic footwork, the river footwork was evenly distributed between attack and defense. It was slightly more defensive, but there wasn't a big difference. The sequence is its strong point. The river footwork's characteristic was its flow, which was as smooth as a river. Rather than repeating it exactly the way it was demonstrated, it was more important to continue the flow, even if he'd end up losing the posture a little. Ha! Raon breathed out excitedly and opened his eyes, and everything about the river footwork came into his view. Tap. He first moved his right foot forward. Enjoying the sensation of pressing down on the well-prepared floor of the training ground, he moved his left foot. The moment the 2 feet naturally crossed each other, fluidity, the first form of river footwork was performed. Pow! Grazing the ground, he rotated his body to his right. It was a movement to evade an enemy's attack, and to thrust one's sword. The second form discharge reverberated the sand on the ground. The performance was closer to perfection than the instructor's demonstration. ZZZT. Raon smiled, a feeling of pleasure running up his shoulders. His feet renewed their flexible flow, as if his feet had known the river footwork from the moment he was born. Yaw one. Rimmer yawned so hard that his mouth looked like it would tear apart. I'm so sleepy. He didn't manage to sleep for a few days because he'd been looking for an appropriate footwork for the trainees, then supplemented it. As a result, his entire body felt exhausted. I guess I'm getting old now. He smirked and looked down at the platform. Raon, who was standing at the center, had his eyes closed without doing anything. It looked like he was imagining the instructor's demonstration in his head. That's a good way to go. Imagining a martial art in the head was indeed an efficient way of training. However, that could only be done once he was more qualified. Since he just learned about footwork, he should have moved his body rather than trying to imagine it. I should tell him to stop goofing around later. Rimmer murmured that he had something to make fun of and looked towards Bayan. He is pretty good. Bayan almost completely reenacted the river footwork's flow, and it looked like he must have experienced learning footwork before. He didn't grasp the true meaning, but he should have been able to master the posture pretty soon. And she is the same. Martha was also rotating her body with light steps, like someone who'd been learning footwork for a long time. Her posture was actually a lot better than Bayan's. Ha! Rimmer smirked, watching Bayan and Martha's footwork. They must be thinking about Raon. They were thinking about their spars with Raon as they learned their footwork. It looked like he'd managed to convince them by telling them that the most important thing in a duel was footwork. And he looked at Runan, who was practicing river footwork on the right side. Her movement was different from the other two. A movement that seemed to assist, rather than facing an opponent. It was pretty obvious who she wanted to help. After that, Rimmer looked through everyone, remembering the strengths and weaknesses that he was going to tell them. Interesting. Since they were still young and pure, he could tell what they were thinking about just from watching them practice. Ah. Rimmer stretched like a bear that had just woken up from its hibernation and stood up. Sparkle. When he was about to give his comments to the trainees, Raon, who'd been standing still like a stone statue, opened his eyes and moved his foot to the back. Ah. He got goosebumps from the look in his clear red eyes, and his foot extended straight like a crane's. Raon's feet slowly advanced. The first form fluidity flowed across the training grounds floor, incorporating the flow of a river. Pow! He took the second posture. Advancing like a fire, his movement seemed to reflect the appearance of a sharp blade. Ha! Rimmer was at a loss for words. That guy. Raon's fluidity was more complete than the instructor that had taught him the footwork. After that, Raon performed the 12 forms of the river footwork without interruption. The posture was close to perfection, without a single mistake. What is that? The trainees and instructors alike stood still and watched Raon's footwork. Did he just learn the footwork from his mental image? Rimmer's hands trembled, and goosebumps appeared throughout his body. When is that monster going to stop surprising me?